There are over 10,000 grape varieties on Earth. Your grocery store carries about 3. You've spent your whole life assuming that's the whole family. Here's the catch. It isn't even close. Start with the one nobody's ever heard of, that quietly built half the wine list at your favorite restaurant. Gouais Blanc. Almost nobody has heard of this grape. Almost nobody grows it. And it might be the single most consequential wine grape in European history. The Roman Emperor Probus brought it to Gaul specifically to keep the locals drinking. It doesn't make good wine on its own. It was considered peasant stock, banned outright in medieval France more than once for being unworthy of serious winemaking. But it was everywhere, and one particular red grape was everywhere too. And at some point in the Middle Ages, in a field nobody was supervising, they crossed. The grape that made that accident possible is nearly extinct today, kept alive in a few conservation vineyards, the invisible grandparent behind half the wine list at your favorite restaurant. Which brings us to the other half of that accident, Pinot Noir named, for the French words for pine and black, after the tight, cone-shaped clusters it grows in. One of the oldest cultivated grapes alive, with a 2,000-year paper trail in Burgundy. Nearly every major modern wine grape traces back to 2 ancestors, Pinot Noir and that humble Gouais Blanc you just met. Pinot is thin-skinned, temperamental, and reacts to the smallest shift in soil or weather, like a smoke detector reacts to burnt toast. A plot 50 yards from another plot can taste like a different grape entirely. There are over 1,000 documented clones of it, more than any other grape on the planet, each one a slightly different answer to the same demanding question. That fragility is exactly why, when everything lines up, it produces something almost nothing else can. Red cherry, raspberry, dried rose, a silkiness winemakers spend entire careers chasing, and rarely catch twice in a row. And when Pinot Noir crossed with Gouais Blanc, the result became the single most popular white wine in America. Chardonnay DNA analysis traced Chardonnay back to that exact cross. Pinot Noir and Gouais Blanc, meeting in a French field sometime in the Middle Ages, with nobody around to take credit. Both parent varieties were common weeds of the medieval vineyard. Neither one, on its own, explains why their offspring ended up on every wine list in America by the 1980s and 90s. Here's the mechanism most people never think about. Unoaked, it tastes like green apple and lemon zest. Oaked, the buttery, vanilla, toasty style that dominated for 2 decades, is the same grape wearing a completely different costume, built entirely by barrel choice, not the fruit itself. You've probably had an argument with a dinner companion about liking Chardonnay or not, while actually disagreeing about oak, not grapes. Not every famous red wine grape has a family tree this tidy. The next one has no business existing at all. Cabernet Sauvignon, the most planted wine grape on earth, the backbone of every "I'll just get a glass of red" order you've ever made. And it was never supposed to exist. Nobody bred it, nobody planned it. DNA testing at UC Davis in 1996 proved it was a chance cross between Cabernet Franc and Sauvignon Blanc, most likely 2 vines growing too close together in 17th century France, doing what vines do without asking permission. The most important red wine grape in the world is, structurally, a mistake that never got corrected because it turned out to be better than anything anyone had actually designed. The berries themselves are small and thick-skinned, closer to a blueberry than the fat green clusters piled in your produce section. Black currant, black cherry, cedar, tobacco, the whole bold, structured profile you associate with a serious red comes from a plant that got there by accident, then spent 400 years convincing the world it meant to. Enough with wine grapes born in French fields. Here's the one that raised you. Concord. An amateur farmer named Ephraim Wales Bull had no formal training in botany. He just spent years in his Massachusetts backyard growing seedlings from wild native grapes until, in 1849, one of them finally tasted like something worth sharing. That accident became Welch's. That accident became grape jelly. That accident became the smell of a PB&J sandwich in a school cafeteria that you can probably conjure right now, 40 years later, without trying. Here's what nobody tells you about that flavor. Winemakers call it foxy, and European vintners spent centuries trying to breed that exact musky, jammy quality out of their grapes. Concord has it in abundance, on purpose, by accident. Try to make serious wine from it, and you get something sweet and candy-like that never sits right at a dinner party. That's not a failure. That's just what the grape was always supposed to be. A flavor, not a wine. And here's the part that should stop you. Nearly every artificially grape-flavored product in America, the soda, the candy, the cough syrup, is dyed to match Concord's purple, even when the product has never touched an actual grape. But Concord wasn't first. It just outlived the one that was. Catawba before Concord. This was the grape. Catawba dominated American vineyards before Concord ever showed up, especially through Ohio and the Great Lakes in the early 1800s. In 1854, the poet Longfellow wrote an entire ode comparing Ohio Catawba wine favorably to Europe's finest. Genuine national pride, wrapped around a pink-skinned native hybrid. Then Prohibition hit in the 1920s, and simply never let go. The momentum shifted permanently to Concord, for juice, and European varieties for wine, and Catawba quietly disappeared into a handful of small New York and Ohio plantings. For one brief moment in the mid-1800s, this was the grape that convinced America it could make wine worth bragging about. And almost nobody today has ever heard its name. Neither Concord nor Catawba is actually native to this continent in the strictest sense. This one is Muscadine. Despite sounding related to Muscat, this one has nothing to do with it, not related. The resemblance is pure coincidence of the alphabet. Muscadine is native to the American Southeast, growing wild from Florida to Virginia for millions of years before anyone thought to plant it on purpose. Here's the mechanism that actually matters. When European colonists tried to grow their familiar wine grapes in the American South, those vines kept dying. The heat, the humidity, the native pests were too much. Muscadine thrived in exactly the conditions that killed everything else, because it belonged there and the imports didn't. It even carries 40 chromosomes instead of the usual 38. Genuinely a different species, not just a cousin. Thick-skinned, plum-sized, intensely sweet and musky, loaded with antioxidants, turned into sweet wine and jam across the South for generations. It's the only grape truly native to American soil, and outside the Southeast, almost nobody can name it. There was one native grape that almost changed the entire direction of American wine. It's not the one you're thinking of. Norton, the only truly American red wine grape ever taken seriously by serious winemakers. And it might have changed everything, if history had gone a different way. Discovered in Virginia in the 1820s, Norton spread through the South and Midwest, with Missouri becoming its stronghold. At the 1873 Vienna World Exhibition, a Missouri Norton won gold, and European judges called it the best red wine of any nation present. Then, phylloxera, a root louse, devastated European and imported American vineyards in the late 1800s. Except Norton, native stock through and through, was completely immune. While Europe scrambled to graft onto American rootstock just to survive, Norton kept growing like nothing had happened. If the American wine industry had built itself around this grape instead of importing European vines, the entire story of American wine might read differently today. Instead, Prohibition arrived, the momentum died, and Norton retreated to small plantings in Missouri and Virginia, still making a dark, earthy red that tastes like nothing else in your local wine aisle. Not every American grape story is about wine, or about being ignored. This next one succeeded by being invisible on purpose, Thompson Seedless. This is almost certainly the grape you ate as a kid without ever thinking about it. Pale green, seedless, mild, the default. The wallpaper of the produce aisle. It came from Persia. Brought to California's Central Valley in the 1800s by a grower named William Thompson, who found it shipped well and produced reliably. Over 85,000 acres of California are still devoted to it. Here's what makes it strange, once you actually look. It's the same grape sold fresh, dried into raisins, pressed into juice, blended into wine, and cooked into jam, showing up in more places on your weekly grocery run than any other single fruit variety. It isn't interesting to eat. That was never the job. Its job was to be dependable enough that you never had to think about it, and it's been quietly succeeding at that for over 100 years. Now go back further than any American story on this list. Back to Cleopatra's Cup. Muscat Cleopatra reportedly drank this one. So did you. Last time you ordered a Moscato at brunch without thinking twice about it. Muscat may be the oldest cultivated grape in human history, with roots pushing back toward ancient Egypt and Persia, somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 years ago. Pliny the Elder wrote about it. Roman soldiers hauled it across the Alps. Monks kept it alive through the Middle Ages in monastery vineyards. And somewhere between then and now, it quietly turned into the light, sweet, slightly fizzy bottle you order, because it's easy, and nobody at the table objects. The flavor is honestly the giveaway, if you'd ever stop to notice it. Orange blossom, peach, honeysuckle, sweetness that sits light instead of cloying. That's not a modern wine trend. That's a 3,000-year-old aromatic signature, still doing exactly what it did in Cleopatra's Cup. Now here's a grape that told America a lie about itself for 80 years. Zinfandel Very. For most of the 20th century, California told you a story. This bold, jammy red was uniquely American. Ours. Born here. That story fell apart in 2002. DNA fingerprinting proved Zinfandel is genetically identical to an ancient Croatian grape called Kreljenak Kaštelanski, and to Italy's Primitivo. The earliest written record of it dates to 1444, in a Croatian priest's notes, where it was called Tribedrag. When researchers went looking for the original vine back in its homeland, they found exactly 9 surviving plants, buried among thousands of others in a single vineyard. Croatia had nearly lost its own grape without anyone noticing, and eventually had to import cuttings back from California just to replant it. If you've ever had white Zinfandel at a backyard barbecue, the sweet pink version outsells the red 6-to-1 in the US. You were drinking a marketing pivot from the 1970s wrapped around a 400-year-old Adriatic secret. And that secret has its own chapter, waiting back home. Kreljenak Kaštelanski. This is the same grape you just met, walked backward to where it started. The earliest written record of it dates to 1444, penned by that Croatian priest under the name Tribedrag. It grew along the Dalmatian coast for centuries, mostly consumed locally, until phylloxera wiped out most of it in the late 1800s. By the late 20th century, most Croatian winemakers didn't even know it still existed. When UC Davis researchers went hunting for Zinfandel's true ancestor in the 1990s, they found exactly 9 surviving vines, tangled among thousands of other plants in one vineyard. The aftermath is the part that should genuinely surprise you. Croatia, trying to reclaim its own heritage, didn't have enough surviving rootstock to replant with, so it imported cuttings from California, descendants of the very vines that had carried this grape away in the first place. A plant that left home, got famous under someone else's name on the other side of the planet, and then had to be shipped back just to survive in the country that made it. Today it grows in both places, and thanks to 400 years of separate soil, weather, and history, the two versions taste nothing alike. Every grape so far got its status by accident, or by surviving history. The last 3 got built on purpose, for a completely different reason, to be given as a gift. Kyoho. In Japan, a single bunch of grapes can cost more than $100, and nobody there finds that strange. Kyoho was engineered in 1937 by researcher Yasushi Ohara, crossbred specifically to be big, sweet, and visually striking enough to function as a gift, not just a snack. Each berry runs roughly the size of a large cherry, deep purple-black, sweet with a faint grape candy edge. Here's the part that reframes the whole thing. In Japan, premium fruit functions as social currency, the way a bottle of good wine or a box of fine chocolates works in America. Kyoho grapes get inspected individually, wrapped in tissue, boxed for weddings and hospital visits and corporate gifts. You've probably never seen one outside an Asian grocery store because the entire American system for pricing fruit has no category for fruit as formal gift. Shine Muscat. If Kyoho is Japan's gift grape, this is its obsession, and it's starting to show up in your neighborhood. Developed in Japan in the late 1980s and commercialized in the 2000s, Shine Muscat is seedless, green, thin-skinned enough to eat whole, and startlingly floral and sweet the first time it hits your mouth. It exploded across China under the name Sunshine Rose, where a premium bunch can sell for $30 to $50. It's spreading through South Korea and Vietnam, and it's beginning to land in American Asian markets at prices that make Thompson seedless shoppers do a double take. For most Americans over 40, this is a genuinely new sensory experience, hiding in the produce section. A grape shaped like everything you already know, tasting like nothing you've ever had. Last one. This grape wasn't discovered, or rescued, or handed down through an empire. It was built to taste like a completely different food, cotton candy. This one exists because a scientist tasted something at a fruit showcase in 2003 and couldn't stop thinking about it. Geneticist David Kane, at an Arkansas fruit breeding showcase, bit into a purple Concord-type grape that tasted, unmistakably, like cotton candy. Wrong texture for retail, but a flavor he'd never encountered in a table grape before. His team in Bakersfield spent nearly a decade and roughly 100,000 test tube plants crossbreeding that grape with European varieties before landing on something sellable. The name came from a group of school kids on a facility tour who didn't need any coaxing to say exactly what it tasted like. Light green, seedless, almost no acidity, which is the actual mechanism behind why the sweetness lingers instead of cutting off sharply, the way a real fair treat does. Someone tried making wine from it once. The company's own CEO said the results smelled like stale donuts. This grape was never meant for a glass. It was built to compete directly with candy, and by most measures, it wins. 10,000 grape varieties exist in the world right now. You've been drinking, eating, and unknowingly building your entire flavor memory around maybe 5 or 6 of them, your whole life, without ever being told there was anything else on the shelf. Every grape on this list did the same thing in a different costume. Got renamed, got forgotten, got smuggled home, got rebranded as something it wasn't, or got born entirely by accident in a field nobody was watching. The bottle in your fridge and the jelly in your pantry were never the whole story. They were just the two that made it to market first, and stayed there long enough that you stopped asking what else was out there.